All right, let's have him up here. Mr. Mark Holcomb. How's everybody doing tonight? Yeah. This is awesome. Thank you for spending your evening with me. This is something that I like to do when I'm not working with Periphery. And long story short, I don't want to sit up here and go on a spiel about what we've been up to lately, but we've taken off this entire year. So you will not see Periphery on a stage until 2019, probably March or April. And that is because we're working on a record. And we finished writing it. We're actually working on it just down the road in Silver Spring, Maryland. And we finished it up, and we're recording it properly in November. Actually, no, mid-October is when we're starting. But when I'm on a break, when we're not writing, when we're not rehearsing, when we're not working on our craft, this is an opportunity for me to get in front of you guys and to, I guess more importantly, open up a dialogue that I'm unable to have with people when we play a show. Who's actually been to a Periphery show before? All right, cool, so it's a decent number. Who has no idea what Periphery sounds like? That's what I'm more curious about. Yes, okay, see, this is why I love this, because if you hear our style of music without any sort of introduction or context, it can be pretty overbearing and almost overwhelming. But now I get to sort of grease the wheels before I show you the music and show that there's a human element to it. But I actually like when there's people who don't know who I am, when people don't know what Periphery is, and when people don't know the style of music. Because that means we get to have a conversation along with me playing the songs and along with me answering any questions you guys have whatsoever about my guitar, about the amp I'm playing, about gear that I use. One thing that we've talked a lot about lately, I've done about 10 or 11 of these clinics in the past month, and one thing that's come up over almost every single clinic is songwriting. Got a lot of songwriters I'm noticing in these crowds who want to ask me, like, how do you guys go about arranging songs? Where does a song begin? Where does a song end? How do you know when you've written a song? How do you know where to start a song? And that's my life. I live 110% in that world. So I'm more than willing to talk about it. I'm actually excited to talk about it if anybody has any questions about how we do that. And oddly enough, music industry questions. A lot of people are curious how a band gets to a different level in today's climate with the music industry, and it's a multi-tiered answer. It's one that I'm more than happy to talk about, and it comes at a pretty impactful time for us because we just began our own record label. We started a record label called 3 Dot Records a couple months ago, and we've been working on it for the past year and a half. So that's finally come to fruition. We get to release every Periphery record on our own label. We get to release our side projects on our own label. And most importantly, and this is why I'm proud to talk about it with you guys, is we get to sign artists that we like. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever about how that works, I'm here for you. Does that make sense? Cool. And before I go into specifics here, I wanna real quick mention how cool it is for Coffee Music and PRS to have me here. Can we please just give them another round of applause? I spent a lot of my teenage years growing up in Los Angeles, in the LA area, Southern California, and I grew up around a lot of faceless guitar stores. I won't name any names, but stores where you didn't feel like you were welcome. You were kind of just a number as opposed to a person. You would walk in, you didn't get any personal attention, and you kind of felt like you were intruding on someone else's grounds. And then you walk into a place like this, where, I don't know if you guys have been upstairs, I just went up there for the first time about 15 minutes ago. It's like a compound. There's nothing but education rooms upstairs, everybody learning in every single room, and you come down here and there's eye contact, people are warm to you and they want to help you and they're asking what you're interested in. And I gotta say, you can't take that stuff for granted, because I never had that growing up. So I was that kid who came to a guitar shop and I wanted to play the Strat for an hour, and I wanted to play the Les Paul for half an hour, and then I wanted to pick up the PRS for 45 minutes. I was that kid who would spend 5 hours a day in a guitar store. And I'd have my mom pick me up in the afternoon after she dropped me off in the morning. So you can't take this for granted, because this shop is not what I just described. This shop is the antithesis of that. So one more round of applause for Coffee Music. Thank you. And as Bob was just mentioning, we have a couple of these in the shop today. I actually just picked it up off the wall and plugged it in, and I don't do anything to it. That's what I do for these clinics. I actually had a horrible mishap last year where we had a European tour that started in Germany, and we flew into Frankfurt, and Delta Airlines lost my guitars. They lost a 6-string, they lost a 7-string, and they lost an 8-string. The 7 and the 8 were private stock. So literally irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind guitars. They lost them for about 3 days. When I say lost, I would say, what do you mean lost? And they'd be like, I think your guitars are in Miami. And I say, well, that's nice and all, but I didn't connect in Miami. How did they get to Miami? And they're like, we don't know. And what I did was, we had a sound check that afternoon. I was like, I have no guitars, so what am I going to do? So I went down to a store in downtown Frankfurt. I asked them really kindly, can I borrow one of my guitars? And then they were kind enough to lend it to me for the gig. So I took it off the wall, did not make one single change except for change string gauges. I put 11 to 56 gauge on there as opposed to 10 to 52. And then I took it to the show, and I played a show with it, and the next morning I just returned it to the shop. No questions asked. So that's the kind of, that's kind of a microcosm of why I'm with Paul Reed Smith and why PRS and I go together so well. Because I want the ability to pick up a guitar and have it play like the one that I use on stage. And if it doesn't, it shouldn't have my name on it. It shouldn't have the PRS name on it. A guitar should be gig ready, no matter what price point it sits at, no matter how expensive it is, no matter the build quality, where it's made. It should be able to be played on stage, be able to be abused in front of people. Who actually plays in bands here? All right, cool. So you guys know what I'm talking about. You ever tried to play a piece of gear that doesn't hold up live? It's stressful. It's stressful. And that's one of those things where it's like, if you're not feeling comfortable with your noise gate, if you're not feeling comfortable with your monitor mix, if you're not feeling comfortable with your amp, you have too much gain in your tone, your strings are dead, your knob's loose, strings are sticking out, those things weigh on your brain when you're playing a show, right? It's like you want your mind to be 100% dedicated to what you're doing musically. You don't want to be thinking about, oh, my neck's sticky, oh, my fretboard really sucks, oh, my pickups are too hot. You don't want to be thinking about that, because then it gets in your head, and then you're overthinking. So again, I'm not a materialistic person. I'm so not a materialistic person. But gear is sacrosanct to me. I have to have things that I'm not stressed about so I can do my job. And if you're interested in music being your job, if you're interested in music being your livelihood, that's one of the most important things. Find out what works for you. You don't need to go buy every piece of gear on the planet, but find the things that work for you. And luckily enough, I've been able to find those things. And I never thought I'd be able to build those things with PRS. This is a guitar that we developed in 2015. And Paul came up to me in 2014 and he asked, would you like to build a guitar together? Because we had talks before, we were friends, and Paul Reed Smith said, you know, would you like to develop a guitar? What would you want it to be like? And it's very hard to say no to Paul Reed Smith. And I said, sure. And we talked. We just hashed out details. He says, what do you like about a guitar? And I say, I want my guitar to be a 1/2 inch longer, scale length. So if you pick up any PRS off the shelf, it's 25 inches. This is 25 and a half, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but I'll tell you why it's so impactful. I play in a lot of low tunings, and our fans will attest to this. I'll show you our highest tuning. This is as high as we get. And that's pretty low. You know, so if that's our ceiling that we're working with, you need to compensate with some other features on your guitar to be able to accommodate such low tunings. First and foremost for me is scale length. That extra 1/2 inch makes it so my string tension doesn't fall apart as soon as I tune low. That's why I have an extra 1/2 inch on my scale length. One of the other features I have is a flat fretboard. So if you pick up, you pick up a Strat off the wall, you pick up a Tele, you look down from the bridge towards the headstock, and you'll see a literal curvature on the fretboard. You'll see it's slightly curved, and it's not major, but you will see a minor curvature. And it depends what brand you're looking at, but different brands will have a different curve, what they call a radius. Mine has no radius. Mine is 20-inch radius, what they call, and that's like a classical guitar. If you guys ever pick up a nylon, like a classical guitar, a nylon string acoustic has a completely flat fretboard, which is when you bend the strings. I love the feeling of being able to bend without a ton of resistance. A lot of Strat players love feeling the resistance. I don't. It's just I come from a metal background. I come from a hard rock background. And I love the feeling of no resistance when I bend. And when I do vibrato, most important. I just got used to the feeling of this, the sort of fluid reaction of having a flat fretboard. So again, if you're interested to see what that feels like, pick up a nylon string acoustic or pick up one of the SEs, one of my SE guitars on the wall over there, if you're interested to see what it feels like. Once I switched to a flat fretboard, it was hard for me to go back. I picked up like a 12-inch curve, and it's not what I like anymore. Yeah.
Is that wider? Is it a little wider too?
The neck?
Yeah.
The neck?
Or like a classic.
Yeah, so the neck on this, it's not one of those super shredder Wizard Ibanez necks. So that was one of those things when I was growing up, I mean, I like Ibanez, I'm not going to knock Ibanez. But the one thing I have is these freak fingers. Like I have these big hands that I used to get made fun of growing up. And for that reason, whenever I switch to an overly small neck, my hands cramp up quite a bit. So I like a little bit of shape. I like a little bit of girth in the neck, just so I can wrap my hand around. And I use my thumb a lot, which I'll get into in a little bit for you guys. But yeah, that's kind of the meat and potatoes of the guitar. And the Seymour Duncan pickups. It's got my signature Seymour Duncan set in there, which I developed with Seymour and the family in Southern California as well. So it accomplishes everything I need as far as metal tones. And this is kind of the bread and butter of the bridge pickup. I needed it to be able to have this kind of like caveman elephant stomping you kind of sound. But what you lose a lot of the times with these metal-oriented bridge pickups is you lose note definition when you go to do chords. So for me, I want to be able to do this, but then switch to this. Say, what's the point of playing chords if your pickups don't make the note content translate in a mix? And I used to hate that about these metal-oriented pickups, because you go to play chords and everything will get lost. You play a power chord, everything will get lost. And when you're talking about chords like this, you need it to translate. You need every note to shine through. Otherwise, you shouldn't be playing those chords. And that was the beauty of this bridge pickup, of the Omega. And the neck is its own thing. The idea with this neck pickup to be, you guys know how you switch to a neck position, it's supposed to be sort of fat and glassy, a little bit more bassy, and just kind of thick. My problem with that was you were locked into that tone with a lot of neck pickups. So I wanted to be able to, so if you change the way you hold a pick, so let's say you hold it like this, right, with a lot of pick sticking out, you're going to get a pretty thick sound. But if you choke up, which is what I do about 90% of the time when I'm playing metal, I'm always choking up. And that's why you hear me do those pinch harmonics every other measure. It's just addicting, it's fun to do. But I choke up and it changes it. It almost sounds like a neck picker. This kind of covers this in-between ground between a neck pickup and a bridge pickup. So it doesn't lock you in to having this overly bassy sine wave kind of sound. You have a little bit of flexibility there. I saw a hand go up a second ago. Yeah?
I was just wondering what the process was with Duncan in like designing the pickups. We talked about your discussions
Oh
with Paul.
man, that was one of the most fun
How
experiences.
does that go?
It was so cool. I'm still such a dork about this kind of stuff. I love it when someone's like, hey, if you had a chance to build something, what would you build? And then my mind goes crazy because I'm such a gearhead. But do you guys know, there's a 7-string player named Keith Merrow? You guys know Keith? So Keith has been a friend of mine for a long time, and he gave me a phone call about 5 years ago. He was working with Seymour Duncan at the time. And he says, hey, would you want to come down to Santa Barbara, where Seymour Duncan is based, and build a pickup set with me? And he's another one of those guys who's hard to say no to. And when there's, anytime someone asks you to build something, it's very hard for me to say no. So I went down there and we spent 4 days iterating and iterating and iterating. So the first morning, we would get a pickup set and we would test it out with a bunch of different amps. And we would write down a list of adjectives that we liked about it and a list of adjectives that we didn't like about it. And then we would send the pickup set back upstairs, and then they would send a new iteration based on our adjectives. So it was so fun. And our ears got a little bit tired at the end of each day, which is why we spaced it out. But every day we were doing maybe 10 to 12 pickup sets. And then by the 4th day, this is what we came up with, the neck and the bridge. So it was just a lot of fun. And to work with a company as prestigious as Seymour Duncan, who I grew up literally just idolizing players who played, it was kind of a trip. But yeah, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into these pickups and the guitar. So before I go on, can I play a song for you guys? I feel like playing. I haven't played all day. I've been sitting in a car all day. So I want to play some guitar. All right, remember how I said this is our highest tuning? This is one of our alternate ones. It's all right. I just tuned my 6th string down to A. Yeah. And this is where the extra ½ inch comes in handy. This is where the extra ½ inch on the scaling comes in handy, because if I were doing this on a short scale guitar, this note would be flopping all over the place, and I would have to get thicker gauges, which doesn't sound good if your string gauges are too thick. So again, it's taken me years to figure out this balance of scale length, string gauges, and tuning. Those are 3 things that kind of go hand in hand with each other. So yeah, this is drop A. I'll play a song in that tuning for you guys. It's called Prayer Position.
have to thank you for really expanding my chord vocabulary on guitar. It's amazing. I was wondering if there's been, has there been like any change to the way that you write riffs or write songs? Like maybe things that you do differently now than when you started with Periphery or on guitar, or just like how that's evolved.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys could hear his question, but he's asking if I've evolved as a musician since, or how I've evolved, I guess more specifically.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, every day it's one of these processes.
It's a complicated question.
Well, music's one of these things that like it's a never-ending learning process, and I'm always, and sometimes I'm very hard on myself. I'm only focusing on what I'm bad at. That's always my first tendency as a playing, is not to focus on what I'm good at. And I struggle. I hit these really bad ruts sometimes where I'm like, I need to be better at alt picking, or I gotta be better at sweep picking, or I gotta be better at whatever. And then I hone in on those weaknesses, which I think it's a really healthy thing to be self-aware. And it's always healthy to be constantly examining yourself as a human being and as a guitar player, whatever your craft is in life. But my mistake is I go way too far towards the negative in my own playing, and I'm healthiest mentally when I'm like walking the line, when I'm like, all right, these are my strengths and these are my weaknesses, and I'm okay with both. And that's why I developed this chord heavy style that you referred to at the beginning of your question, is because that was one of my strengths. That was one of the things that I found most fun about the guitar. And when I go back to basics, when I hit one of these brutal ruts where I don't even want to pick up a guitar, I always go back to the idea that guitar should be fun. Like it should be a vacation for 30 minutes, for 2 hours, however long I want to play it. It should be an escape. And then once I boil it down to that, once I remember what it was like to be 14 years old and learning guitar, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to have fun. And I'm not going to practice scales first. I'm not going to practice any of this rudimentary warm-up stuff that just makes me yawn thinking about it. But I'm going to go back and play something that I enjoy, and that's going to reignite the love I have for guitar. So to answer your question, it's nonstop. It's nonstop. And right now I'm in this phase where I'm trying to stop overwriting. One of my biggest weaknesses is I write too much. Like if I write a couple riffs for the band and I bring the riffs to the guys, oftentimes they'll say, "Where's everything else go?" You took all the notes, and that's a bad tendency I have. And it's one thing I think as a band we're learning not to do. You guys know the record Periphery 1 and Periphery 2. Those records are actually pretty hard for me to listen to now because they're so layer intensive. And as a guitar player, I want to put layers on everything. I want to harmonize everything. I want everything to sound like Iron Maiden times 20. I just want every note stacked so it sounds like this thick wall of music. But what that does to a singer, and poor Spencer. Poor Spencer. And I remember early demos we would send him for Juggernaut. He'd be like, guys, like, what do I do with this? Like you're playing every note. Like what note in this scale, like where could I possibly start? There's something playing everything. And I think learning to be a band that's not just about guitar nerd stuff, I think that's been the biggest awakening for me. Because it's fun, it's the world I live in. I'm a guitar player. And I'm not one of these freaks who plays piano and drums and trombone and stuff. I just play guitar. That's what I do. No, good freaks. Oh, you're a good freak if you do that. You're a freak in a good way. There's two kinds of freaks. There's a lot of different kinds of freaks, actually. I said freak, and I totally lost my train of thought. So...
You're talking about guys that play drums and trombone and guitar.
Yes, I'm a guitar player. I'm a guitar player first and foremost, so my tendency is just to write a lot of guitar parts. But I've learned to coexist with a singer and to coexist with a band. Boil your ideas down to their simplest, to where they convey what you want them to convey. And I can't tell you how much of an awakening that's been for me. Figure out what your songs want to say, figure out what your riffs intend to do. Like if you just want to write an epic riff, write an epic riff, but make sure it fits in a song. Because nobody cares about a riff if it's not part of the song. So I always try and, these days, not try and think too much about stuff like that. Yeah.
Tell us about the aesthetics of your guitar. How much input did you have into how the guitar looks?
I had to say 100%. That was one of the cool things, which before I met Paul, I didn't know how signature guitars worked. I didn't know if it was one of those things where they call you into a boardroom and they're like, can we put your name on a guitar? Here's what it's going to look like. I didn't know how that stuff operated. So when they asked me to do it, I said yes, but only if I could have complete autonomy and control over it. And they were like, well, that's how we do it. Well, how did you think this worked, you idiot? And I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I knew that, I was just kidding. And then from there, they said, you know, what color do you want it? We actually went in the spray room in the PRS. If you guys have ever visited the PRS factory, you guys know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, and if you like guitars, it's just right there. You got no excuse. Go down to Stevensville and go visit the factory because it's amazing. We went in the spray room. We sprayed down about 10 different samples of this, and we finally settled on one color. And then we chose the body woods, we chose the pickups, chose the materials from the ground up. And I had to say, it was definitely not one of those things where, you know, they just slapped my name on it. It was organic from the ground up from the very moment they asked me. Yes, sir.
So, of all the bands that you've toured with, who have you learned the most from, and what was it that you learned?
I guess that's actually an easy one. It'd be Dream Theater, because we toured Europe with them in 2011, and it came at a really interesting point in our career. So we had just started touring professionally about a year and a half before, so we were still pretty green, and we were playing clubs. You know, 250, 500 capacity, 500 at the very most. But most of our shows were attended by 150 to 250 people. And then we get an email from Dream Theater, and they want to take us out in Europe, where they're playing arenas. And the first show of the tour was in Finland in an ice hockey arena. And it was sold out. It was like 11,000 people. And up to that point, we had never played in front of more than 500, maybe a little bit more. And it was definitely a rude awakening. Because I thought that we were cool on a small stage, and I thought we had our stuff down. But then we get on these big stages, and you don't know what to do with yourself. These stages are massive. So if you're one of these guys who stares at their shoes and doesn't move around, you're going to look kind of silly just stationary on a stage that's the size of this store. You know, it was crazy, and we had some issues on that tour with technology. And so if you guys have ever seen us live before, we don't have pedal boards. We have nothing on the floor. And that's because we play Fractal Axe-Effects live, and we have those connected to MacBook Pros, which control our preset changes on our Axe-Effects. So it's all automated. We program everything ourselves. That's actually what consists of most of our pre-production time, is programming our computer to tell our Axe-Effects when to change presets. And show one in Finland, our computer crashes. And we weren't smart enough to run with backups in place. So when it crashed, it was bad. It was real bad. It crashed in the second minute of a 15-minute long song. So we were stuck with one preset the whole song. Just a matter of what you got stuck with. It was kind of musical chairs in a way, or unmusical chairs. I was stuck on like a clean tone for a 15-minute long heavy metal song. It was tough, and that tour, I remember John coming up to us. I have never said this in front of people before, but I'm doing it now. So I hope John's not watching this. But he came up to, John Petrucci came up to us in the dressing room after the show, and he said, you guys got to fix this. And that kind of language is not really used from musician to musician. That language is used from tour manager to musician, from crew member to musician, from manager to musician. Musicians are sensitive people, you know? So if the wrong person tells them the wrong thing, it can be like, oh my God, the sky's falling. When Petrucci said that to us, you could hear a pin drop a country away for us. Because we were like, this is like our hero, you know, this is one of our heroes. Our guitar hero is telling us that we got to fix our stuff. And he had the kind of sincerity in his voice that to me signaled if we didn't, we'd maybe have to talk about chicken or fish, you know, what kind of meal you want on your flight home, that kind of stuff. So for us, that was a big moment, a turning point for us. We learned how to roll with backups. We learned how to be more professional on stage. We learned how to be on time. That was another thing. We were not pro in that respect. Little things like being on time, little things like being personable, easy to work with, try to impress people, not impress, try to make a good impression on people in the business, because people talk in the business, people talk in the industry, word gets around. If you treat one loader at a venue, or one sound guy or one monitor guy poorly at a venue, they're going to be talking about it a week later when you go play at the state across you. So that stuff gets around, and for us, we learned how to make a good impression on that tour to the people that surround us, and that kind of stuff is invaluable. And I'm not even talking about the performance aspect of it. Those guys practice hours a day on tour, and we didn't warm up at all before we went on. We would drink a beer and just walk on stage. You can't do that. You could do that if you play in the Ramones, or you could do it if you played in Nirvana or whatever, any grunge band. But if you play this, this is challenging music if you're not paying attention. And for us, we learned that you got to practice. You have to practice every day on tour as just a regular routine. So yeah, I mean that tour for a multitude of reasons was a turning point. Can I get to you over there?
Yeah. Other than Dream Theater,
Yeah.
who else would you cite as like an inspiration as to like how you became a musician?
Yeah, I mean the big three for me that made me want to do this for a living, and I knew it right away. I heard these three guys, and it made me say to myself, I want to do this. I want to either be a professional basketball player, which is what I really wanted to be when I was a kid, or a musician. And those three guys were, it was James Hetfield first, it was Hetfield, and it was Dimebag Darrell, and then it was Randy. Randy Rhoads came second, but I was obsessed with Randy and those first two Ozzy records and then the live one after. But those three were big for me. And then I guess in a modern sense it was Devin Townsend. You guys know who Devin Townsend is? Oh man, I'm the biggest Devin fan on the planet. Like he's one of those guys who for me is just sacred. Everything he does, I'll go out and buy it day one. Yeah. Can I answer your question?
On average, how long does it take to write a riff?
Oh, that just depends. It depends on the riff. Sometimes I'll just be joking around with the band, and I'll be like, "Hey, what if this turned into a?" I'll just play some random stuff that didn't sound good, and they'll be like, "You know what? That's actually not bad. Let's try it." And then we'll record it, and I'll say, "I think we could do something with this."
That's usually my process when I'm writing.
Really?
Yeah,
Cool,
I'm really
cool.
just noodling, and then I'm just like, "Hey, this sounds good. I'm gonna make something out of
Yeah,
this."
yeah. There is no one way to do it. It could be fluky like that, or you could sit there and say, okay, you know what? I'm free all afternoon, so starting at noon, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write 3 riffs by 3 o'clock. I do little dumb assignments like that for myself. I almost give myself homework. I'm like, if I can do this, then I'm going to be happy with myself. So there's a number of ways to do it. Yeah, thank you for the question, though.
What about that riff you played, that awesome piece you just played? I mean,
Yeah,
that was really complicated, that beautiful kind of progression, I guess.
yeah. Thank you.
How did you come up with it? Was that just kind of just one day?
The last song I played was all of us writing in a room together. So our bass player had that first riff written. I wrote the second one. Misha wrote the third. Our other guitar player Jake wrote the fourth. And it was musical chairs for that song. We kind of passed the baton, so to speak, for that one. So that's the beauty about collaborating with other people. Who records themselves here? Who actually does like bedroom production? Right. So I did that for a lot of years too, and I still do to an extent. But one thing that I found was that I wouldn't like to work with people. I would just like to do everything myself because I could, and I liked the way I sounded. I was just like, well, I don't need anybody else's input. But when I really started to grow as a musician is when I became more social. And I started to get people to come in and record with me. Or I want to record you, or you record me, or let's write together. And there's this whole social side of music that I feel like is super easy to ignore as a young person now. A lot of people don't talk to each other. They spend a lot of time on their phones. They learn from YouTube, they learn from Instagram, and they learn from Facebook. But there's no one-on-one, there's no FaceTime, and there's nothing like being able to connect musically with somebody with them right in front of you. That's the most satisfying feeling, when you find a musical sibling, in a sense. And that's the beauty of being in a band. That's why I feel lucky, because I've connected with those guys, and they're out there. A lot of people don't know that they've met their musical sibling because they're too shy to sit down and jam with them. But if you hear somebody doing some cool stuff in a shop, or if you hear somebody doing some kind of move or some kind of progression that you want to learn, go up to them and ask how they're doing it. You could sound like a weirdo, but who cares? It's the connection that matters, and I feel like that's getting lost. I'm going to stop harping on that because I could be here for hours talking about this. Communicate. Yeah, I can do one more question. I'll get to you after the next song, but yeah.
So building off of that,
Yeah.
you said in an interview or something one time, the worst mistake you ever did when trying to start a band was only looking locally.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate on that and like how to go about starting a band?
Yeah, what I did, so when I was sort of in my formative years trying to get a band together, I would just look locally. I would go to the bulletin boards, go to cafes, just see if I could meet somebody who lived where I was. But where it really came together was when I just started to randomly get in touch with people. I'd hear, so it was in MySpace, the MySpace days, right? Yeah, MySpace. Top 8, baby. I would hear a band that I like, and I would just write them a message, and I would say, "Hey, you guys are awesome. I like what you do. Thank you for the inspiration." And sometimes they write back, and that's what I did. I did that nonstop. I just reached out to everybody that I could, just to compliment, not selling my own product, because that's where you lose people. When you come up to somebody and you're like, "Hey, listen to my band," I'm not going to listen to your band if you come up to me like that. What I'm going to do is I'll check it out. If we have a discussion, if we can find mutual ground and talk, whether it's about the weather, whether it's about sports, or this awesome Thai restaurant that I hear is just down the street over here, you know, stuff like that. There needs to be common ground before you start talking about, well, listen to my band or check this out, because that's a cold call. That's no different than anybody walking up to your door and be like, you know, buy my brownies. I don't even know you. What's your kitchen look like? You know, is your kitchen clean? Yeah, what kind of brownies? What's in them? But you know, for me, that was a big turning point, is reaching out, and that's how I met Misha. That's how I met Jake, from reaching out, and they so happened to be from not far away from me. Misha lived in my city, which is crazy, and then Jake lived in New York, and he moved down to join Periphery. So if the music is special enough, and the people are young enough, if you don't got a wife, you don't got kids, you don't got a husband, you can move for your art. And that's what we did, is we relocated to accommodate this thing that we believed in strongly. But the belief had to be there. And that's why you shouldn't limit your scope to just what's around you, because that can be very limiting. If you reach out to people, just regardless of where they could live in South Africa. But if you're networking, and if you're establishing a dialogue with people who you admire, just a dialogue, who knows what can happen. Can I play another song? Yeah. Cool. This is an old one that I wrote in my first side project called Haunted Shores. And this was the project that I had before Periphery. And I still do it on the side when Periphery's not busy, because it's my fast project. Everything that I write that's too fast for Periphery, I just put it in Haunted Shores. So this is how that song goes. It's called Harrison Fjord. questions before I go on? Yes, sir.
How do you get out of the fifth chord / pentatonic rut? Like, do you listen to other music, or like, what do you do to get out of the rut of playing the same?
There's a couple of tricks that I have, and I go through those stages where I play nothing but the same shapes and same patterns and all that. One exercise that I started doing maybe 11 or 12 years ago, when I started writing this music, in fact, that particular song was written as I was having problems with what you were just describing. I would put my guitar in a drop tuning, and instead of playing in like an A minor or a D or like a random bar chord, minor chord, major chord, I would throw all that out the window, and I would just try and build a chord note by note, deliberately and slowly. I wouldn't just slam my fingers down and see what that sounds like, because I think as guitar players, at least I do that a lot. And whenever I do that, I'm like, all right, stop. Let's think about what I want this chord to say. So I'll find a root note. And again, I'm in a drop tuning. I'll find a root note, and I'll just pick voicings one by one. And for argument's sake, this is one of the chords that I came up with in that era. This is like my go-to. It's my favorite chord ever. So I'll find a root note, and from there, I'll fret it with my thumb, and then I have 4 fingers left to voice the chord. So if I have these first 2 notes covered, I can start to see what notes, just one note, how that sounds, and move it around. So and just sort of play with that one note, see how it shifts, and see where it sounds best. And then I would move on. Once I found that note, those 3 notes, I would find the next one, just deliberately and slowly. So the next one, that's cool, it's a minor chord. And then I would just stack another one on top of it. But again, the process is to think about it, to think about the note and find if that note makes sense in terms of what you want it to sound like. So that sounds cool, that's 5 notes. Let's see if I can get a 6. That's 6. And that's how I started playing that chord, was I sat down and I took a look at the intervals and the relationships between each note, just 2 notes, and I expanded on that once I found the notes that I liked. So for me, that's always a good way to take a step back from guitar world, from how we think as guitar players, from playing the same pentatonic blues scales, from playing the same neoclassical ing bass scale that you know, or whatever, is to take a step back and think deliberately about what you're playing, and slowly, not in a way that's meant to impress people, not in a way that is even necessarily meant to sound good, but in a way where it sort of makes you think about what you're playing a little bit differently. You slow things down. And it's like in sports, when you slow things down, you tend to play the game better. You go back to basics. And with this, that's how I came up with, I didn't come up with it. I mean, it had to be a chord before I played it, but that's how I started playing that chord. And let me add this. I don't know music theory. I don't know any music theory. I took 2 guitar lessons when I was a kid, and then I stopped because I don't think my family could afford it at the time. This was in the mid-90s. I stopped after 2 lessons, and I did the rest of my learning on my own and through a community that I formed for myself throughout classmates and other kids that I knew who played guitar, which that stuff goes hand in hand with music lessons, is feeling part of a circle. Feeling part of a community is invaluable. So I don't know theory. Jake doesn't know theory. Misha doesn't know theory. We're all kind of Neanderthals. But again, the way I think of theory is it's a language, right? It's a language that you use to convey ideas to somebody else who speaks the same language. The good thing is that with Jake and Misha, we all speak the same language musically. We all get each other. We've all been playing together for over a decade now, so we all speak the same language. It's just not the one that's established by the layman, by people who know theory. So yeah, for me, I trust my ear exclusively because I don't have music to read. I've never once written any periphery. I've never written tablature for periphery. I've never written music notation. I don't know how to. For me, it's just I rely on my ear heavily, which is equally as important as being schooled, following your ear. Can I get to anybody else's question? Yes, sir.
So when you play live, what do you use to program? Like, what program do you use to automate everything?
So he's asking about how do we automate our Axe Effects changes live, our preset changes, and that's just through Cubase. Actually, now we're using Pro Tools on stage. So we have a Pro Tools session. This Pro Tools session has a click track that gets sent to our drummer's ears, has a click track that gets sent to the guitar player's ears because we have in-ear monitors. It has backing tracks, like there's a violin part in Marigold, there's all these crazy instruments being played on the songs that we couldn't replicate live, so we put the backing tracks in that Pro Tools session. But most importantly for the guitar players, there's one lane in there that has all these MIDI points that communicate to our Axe Effects when to switch. So it's my favorite thing about our stage setup is the sort of high fidelity, or sort of high tech nature of it. Yeah. I saw another hand up go. Yeah.
What Periphery song are you most proud of, like, as a musician?
Oh. None of them? No. There's ones that mean more than others sentimentally because of what they symbolize and when in our career that they happen. Like Mile Zero and Scarlet are very important to me because those were the first 2 songs I contributed to with the guys. But in terms of something musically, and just of how it came together, and something that to me symbolizes the nature of a healthy band is Omega. Is Omega. Because that song, so for those of you who don't know, and I'll play it in a second, I'll play some of it. Omega is, I think it's what, 12 minutes? It's a 12-minute long song. And Misha and I, we wrote the demo for it. I think it was like a 3.5-minute demo. And we sent it out to the guys, we emailed it to them late at night, and then the next morning there's no replies. And then a day goes by and no replies. A couple days go by, no replies. We have a band conference call a week later, nobody mentions it. And we're like, damn it, nobody likes our song. So what we did, and this is a lesson that I learned at this point in time, and I would strongly urge you guys to do the same. If you're in a band and you're with a bandmate that doesn't like your idea, just don't be mad about it. Just set it aside and hide it in a folder on your computer. Because that's what we did. We didn't press the issue. We just said, well, if nobody likes this, we're just going to set it aside for ourselves. And then a year and a half later, we play the demo on our tour bus because we're all sitting in the back of the bus, we're all listening to music late at night. We play the demo, and they're like, dude, what is this? This is amazing. And I'm like, you hated this 15 months ago. And that taught me right there that our musicians' tastes can change like that, right? Like if you're a fan of movies, movies can be great one year and you see them 3 years later and it's awful. Same with food. It's just like, that's how we comprehend things as human beings, is at one point in time something will make sense to us. Whereas a year ago, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it didn't make sense to us. So when we showed them the demo, they're like, we should do something with that. We're like, yes, finally. So we went and we wrote another section for it, and then we weren't happy with it. 6 months later, we came back to it again. We added another section, but something quite wasn't right. And then we came back to it a year later when we were writing for Juggernaut, and we nailed it. We sat down and we got an arrangement that worked. And if you're writing a 12-minute song, it can't just be part after part after part after part after part. Otherwise, it's just bludgeoning and it's fatiguing. You have to make it work like a story. And that's what the challenge was with that song. So it was a battle. That song was, I think, 3 years in the making, just because it never stuck. Nothing ever stuck for that song. But we finally got it working, and I think when we played it in our last tour, people seemed to really be into the idea of us playing it. Can I play a little bit of it for you guys right now? Yeah. Cool. This is the song that almost never was. And don't worry, I'm not playing all 12 minutes. I played the whole thing a couple months ago for people, and they were, I think the people in front were a little happy, but in the back, it's people on their phones and just playing Candy Crush while I'm sitting here sweating. And that was the demo that I was talking about a second ago. Just that section. That's where the demo begun and ended. And that's what the band took issue with. They're like, it's not a full song. And to us, that didn't feel like a full song either, which is why we continued for 8 minutes longer. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And musically, I'm proud of the fact that there's this crazy emphasis on dissonance. You guys know those parts that I'm talking about in that song? There's notes that just sound out. Out, not in a good way. You know, they sounds chaotic to the ear, but because it's played with attitude and with intent and conviction, it makes sense. And the intent is to sort of sound disorienting. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. There's a riff in there that uses a really messed up pattern melodically. All right, first of all, the riff starts with this chord. Listen to how gnarly that chord is. Listen to how many instances of like half-step dissonances and whole-step relationships are on this note. Listen. So you have that. Ooh, that's ugly. That's the first chord of that riff. But the goal of that part, placed where it was to sound messy, was to sound chaotic because of where it's situated in the song. And this is why what I was saying earlier about what do you want your song to say? Not the riff, but what do you want the song to say? And for us, there needed to be a part that sounded messy and dirty and almost unmusical in how dissonant it was, and that was the goal behind that riff. And there's some other sections in there that kind of mirror that. You guys know that clean section that I was playing? Where there's chords in it that, for instance, this one, so ugly. But if you apply it in a way to where it sits between two parts that make it sound good contextually, not on its own, because if I play this right now, it doesn't sound good. It sounds like I'm messing up. It sounds like I'm falling downstairs. But contextually, situated where it is in the song, it makes sense. And that's why I would say don't judge a riff on its own. Judge it in the context of the song. So that's my spiel. I'll take a couple more questions for you guys, and I'll play another song and get out of your hair. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be hanging out for a little bit back there. I want to meet you guys if you're interested in hanging out. I'll be signing stuff, pictures, and all that. And I want to meet you guys if you're down. So I can take 3 more questions if you. All right, yeah, really, don't be shy because I'm not going to be back for a while. Periphery's not playing any shows for like another 8 months, so I want to hear the questions. 3 more. I got one in the back.
Is there any music you like that would seem odd, out of place, like any genre that we would go, wow, I wouldn't imagine you would like that?
I love really mind-numbing EDM, like electronic music. I love it because I don't got to think when I listen to it, you know? And when I listen to music, my one thing is I'm always thinking too much, I can't relax. So when I put on electronic music, I don't know what's going on, so I just listen and I just enjoy it. Yeah, I love guys like Zed and Porter Robinson, and just really kind of easy to listen to electronic music. Yeah, it's soothing. It's good for planes and car rides too. Yeah, I see a couple hands in the back. So, gentleman with the hat back there.
Can you talk a little bit about the record label that you all started, and not just why you wanted to, but the process that you all went through to do that?
Yeah, so he's referring to 3 Dot Records, a record label that I started with the guys recently, and the impetus for that was just not being, how do I say this diplomatically? I guess trying to reconcile the idea that there's these people working for you, right? You're on a record label. They're supposed to be doing work for you. You signed a deal with these people, and you expect them to be fighting for you. You expect them to be working for you, to be earning the cut that they're given. And we've always been very happy with our record label, with the Sumerian deal. We were extremely happy with it, but over the years we started to list why we were on a record label. Mentally, we would sort of keep inventory of the reasons that we're with a record label. And then we started to have this other dialogue that mirrored that list, where we said, why can't we do these things on our own? You know, and how possible would it be to do things like distribution, promotion, to basically represent ourselves from a record label perspective. And we began to reconcile those things. And we had a conversation, I think as far back as 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, where we said we should try it. We should get out of it. Once we get out of our deal, once we give them our last record, which was Periphery 3, that was the last record of our deal, we should try it. And it started out as kind of like a challenge to ourselves, and then it started to become pretty realistic, where we said, you know, we're going to have to find distributors in the States, distributors in Europe, distributors in Australia, in Asia, and we started to get our team in place, hire somebody to run the business side of the record label, hire management to manage that side of it, and we started to get all the puzzle pieces in place, and then here we are. So the goal was to have control, and that's one thing that Periphery's always been about. We don't want to be the biggest band in the world. You're not going to see us playing arenas, headliner. You're not going to see us in huge amphitheaters. You're not going to see us on MTV. You're not going to hear us on the radio. But what we love is control. As long as we can control our art and deliver it effectively to people who want to hear it, that's all that matters to us. If we can have the most one-to-one source of communication to people who want to hear it, that's really all that matters to me. And I don't want to have any sort of unnecessary parties involved along the way. I want to be able to have this be one-to-one. So as simple as it is, as what I'm doing right now, talking in front of you guys, that's how I want our music to be portrayed once it eventually comes out. So I got one more question. I'm going to answer your question. Yeah.
How do I keep you focused on stage?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I used to. Who here has ever suffered from stage fright? Stage fright, anybody? Yeah. I was a really shy kid growing up. I was super shy. So shy to where it was hard for me to talk to people in elementary school. But I'll tell you what changed everything for me. What changed my entire outlook on life was falling in love with this, because I finally felt like I belonged to something. And then I started to become more social. I hated talking to people. And then I started learning guitar, and then all of a sudden I felt like I belonged to community. And that was the one thing that always calmed me down. I hate public speaking. I hate being in front of a microphone unless I have one of these in front of me. You know? And that's why I don't get stage fright, because it's anymore I don't get stage fright, because this is home, you know? I'm constantly clutching something that brings me back to when I was 12 years old. So that's my answer. And with that, I want to thank you guys one more time for being here. Please give yourselves a round of applause. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm hanging out for probably another hour back there, so come say hi. I'm also going to leave my guitar here if you guys are interested in playing it. I think Bob said this one's been sold already. Is that right, Bob? Yeah, this one's been sold, sorry. But there are 3 over there on the wall. What's that?
I'm not sorry.
Oh, you're not sorry. You know what? I'm not sorry either. I take it back. I'm going to play one more song for you guys, okay? Then come say hi back there. Mm-hmm.